You are listening to Geopolitics and Empire. Support the Renegade transmission, as always, through the website, geopoliticsandempire.com, through the Substack, geopoliticsandempire.substack.com. You can become a paid subscriber to get my weekly analysis and join our off-the-record Zoom calls. If you want to listen without the ads on the podcast platforms, become a subscriber on Apple subscriptions or Supercast, which allows you to listen through. It gives you a private RSS feed to listen on any podcast player without the ads. $50 a year. $5 a month. Donate if you're comfortable financially. You can send some shekels or pesos my way. And if you want to chat with me about my experience in expatriating, geopolitics and conspiracy, or the meaning of life, you can purchase a consult. And do check out all of my affiliates over at the website: American Gold Exchange, Wise Wolf Gold, Escape the Technocracy courses on escaping the technocracy, Above Phone, Easy DNS, and so forth. Returning to the pirate signal is Serbian analyst, journalist Nikola Mikovic. Štajma, Nikola.
Hi, thank you for having me. I was not in the mood to be on your show, to be honest, but after you offered me that great honorarium, I just couldn't say no. I'm joking, of course, there's no honorarium. The Geopolitics and Empire is not the BBC, and Hrvo is not in a position to pay his guests to appear on his show. So dear listeners and viewers, if you can, please help this channel. Donate $5, $10. Every cent matters to Hrvo. He depends on you. He's not funded by any governments or large corporations. And this is one of the very few channels where you can hear a variety of different opinions. And I'm living proof because Hrvo invited me, even though my opinion is totally different from that of most of his guests. So I'm sorry for stealing your show, Hrvo. Please continue.
Well, your opinion is unpopular, but it's been correct. So, and thanks for that plug, by the way. I got to mention, someone on the YouTube comment, some moron, I had on Dania Samuelson, the CEO of my new affiliate, which I have not received any money from. It's, in the hope if someone buys a few ounces of silver, gold, platinum, or palladium from them, I will get, I'll get it. They'll throw a few gold flakes my way. But I do not pay anyone, or I don't get paid to have guests either way. So just to get that out of the way, this is a true guerrilla transmission.
And
so,
your YouTube channel has also been demonetized, and I know.
Well, now it's remonetized, so it is remonetized. But again, I get absolute peanuts from all of that stuff. Even in general, from all the affiliate stuff and monetization are absolute peanuts. So yeah, that's why the best way is to become a paid subscriber. But let's get into the main course, and I wanted to share my screen. Let's see, where are we now? Here we are, sharing my screen real quick to show. So you tweeted this some 2 weeks ago, referencing our past interview. I think it was 2 years. It's been too long, Nikola. But you say U.S. actions in Venezuela have clearly shown that what I told Hrvo 2 years ago was correct. This world is and will remain dominated by the West for a long time. My warmest regards to all those who still believe in the multipolar world narrative. And then you wrote a piece for, is this A News?
A News.
Mm-hmm. And you say the U.S. actions in Venezuela have clearly demonstrated not only that Latin America remains firmly in Washington's geopolitical orbit, but also that the U.S. is the only global superpower. As such, it can allow itself to do what actors claiming to represent a multipolar world can only dream of. And a few more pieces, and then we'll throw it back to you just to give examples. So you've got Venezuela and now Iran, and it's being reported that Russia issues a warning to the U.S. Any attack on Iran would be categorically unacceptable and would be the gravest mistake. But how many times have we heard that, Nikola? And I like this analysis from Sightbringer, a popular X account I just discovered, 100,000 plus followers. He says, this is ritual posturing from Putin, not deterrent. Putin is not defending Iran. He's defending multipolar narrative coherence. He's protecting the illusion of a bloc that still moves in concert against US force projection, but the timing exposes the weakness. If Moscow had leverage, it would have been used earlier. The delayed response is reactive, not constraining, and so on. China Foreign Ministry came out and said China hopes Iran will maintain stability and supports Iran in doing so. And I commented, support Iran like you supported Venezuela? You mean there was the Chinese envoy meeting with Venezuela right like the day before Maduro was extracted, kidnapped? They didn't do nothing. They didn't do nothing with Gaddafi in Libya. They didn't do nothing with Assad in Syria. They didn't do nothing with Maduro in Venezuela. How many times do the multipolaristas have to get things wrong, Nikola? And there's one more. This is a popular account as well. Shanaka Anslem Pereira. He says, China just told the world it won't fight for Iran. Everyone's reading China backs Iran. Here's what China actually said. Partnership, not alliance. That's not support. That's abandonment in diplomatic language. He's looking at, Israel and U.S. striking Fordow and Natanz, 2025. China's military response, 0. Weapons delivered, 0. Defense commitment, 0. You get the idea. And then on Iran, you make some interesting point. You say this is a typical Kremlin-style reproach. Iran's foreign minister says we're ready for war, but also for dialogue. So Tehran signals readiness for war, which means further destruction of its own infrastructure, while still hinting at talks with the West, despite repeatedly accusing it of deceiving Iran. So I will stop there. Your thoughts? What's going on?
I don't think there is such thing as a multipolar world. I don't think it ever existed. Maybe it did in the past, thousands of years ago, when you had like the Greek or Roman Empire in Europe and the ancient Chinese Empire and the Mayan civilization in South America. But at the time, they did not know about each other. So you could say that at the time the world was multipolar. But nowadays, this world is dominated by the United States and European powers, and that's been the case for centuries. And I think that will remain the case during our lifetime for sure. Of course, those people that you mentioned, some of them are deliberately spreading the disinformation about the so-called multipolar world and how Russia and China are actually building it. They've been building the multipolar world for at least 25 years. That's when I started actively covering it. In 2000, 2001, they discussed the multipolar world, and it's still not there. They never built it. Now, when it comes to those countries that you mentioned, Venezuela and Iran, it's quite clear that Russia did not provide any support to Maduro. I have to point out that China, unlike Russia, never talks about formal alliance. It always talks about friendship. So it's always about friendship and cooperation because it does not want to promise that it will defend anyone and then nothing happens. So it is Russia that labels countries it deals with as allies. And that's exactly what it did when it comes to Maduro and to Caracas. One of the Russian top officials did that. I recently wrote an article about that. Hopefully it will be published soon. And prior to what happened in the South American country, Putin and Maduro spoke over the phone, and Maduro called Putin his brother and said that Russia would support him and then people in his country, but that, as we know, never happened. So Trump's move was a huge diplomatic defeat for Russia. Doesn't matter that Russia did not have any significant investments in that country, but when it comes to media and propaganda, Russia definitely suffered a defeat because the country is now firmly in the U.S. sphere of influence. The whole region, South America, I'm not an expert on South America. You are. You live there, after all. Actually, you live in Central America, but still.
Latin America, to be
Latin, yeah. You know that region much better than I do. But still, it was always in the U.S. Geopolitical orbits, and Russia has no significant economic presence there. But in spite of that, the Kremlin was always trying to create an illusion that it is a powerful actor there and that it will protect its strategic partners, not formal allies, because it does not have any real formal allies in that region. It has strategic partners. But in spite of that, we see that Russia did absolutely nothing to protect Maduro. And that whole operation was very interesting. You saw American military helicopters flying freely over Caracas, landing there, capturing Maduro and taking him to the United States. You can launch such an operation only if you have firm guarantees that nothing will happen to your troops. Russia tried to do something similar in 2022 in Kiev. It launched the operation to capture the airport called Gostomel near Kiev, and its forces managed to land there and they captured the airport, but they had to eventually withdraw from the entire Kiev Oblast because they according to reports, they were not aware that Ukraine was willing to fight. I was aware of that, and I wrote several articles on that topic in 2021 and earlier, saying that Ukraine will not accept Russia's occupation, that it will fight in the event of war, and that's exactly what happened. So Russia suffered a defeat in that direction, and the United States, on the other hand, successfully completed its special military operation. That's what it was in reality, right? Because it lasted for 24 hours or so, and Trump achieved his goal. So Maduro is no longer in charge. Now, there are speculations that he always worked for the United States, that he's not in prison, that he's somewhere else. Maybe that's true, maybe not. I don't know. There's no evidence, so I don't want to speculate on that. So let's stick to the facts. So he's no longer in charge, and the country is now dependent on the United States. It cannot export its oil to other nations without Washington's approval. So what is Russia going to do about it? Well, nothing. China could be in big problem economically, although not as big as some media try to portray, because it's only around 4% of its oil imports that come from South America, from Venezuela. But other producers are more important, Russia as well. So even if Caracas, under American pressure, completely stops exporting oil to China, it is Russia that can simply increase its oil supply to Beijing. So I don't think China will be in a really big problem. There will be some consequences, but nothing huge. But in any case, the two countries did absolutely nothing to help Maduro, and I don't think they will do anything to help Iran if the United States decides to attack the country. So we're talking now, it's the 15th of January, so it's quite possible that the US will launch its military operation against Iran in the coming days. I think it's only a matter of time before Washington decides to do that. Trump recently said that he does not plan to attack Iran, right? Because the authorities there no longer kill protesters. So if he said he does not plan to do that, then we can be pretty sure that that he will actually attack Iran together with Israel or America on its own. It doesn't really matter. I think Israel will be involved as well, one way or another. So there were reports that China supplied air defense systems to Iran. I don't think it was ever officially confirmed, but even if they are there, that does not necessarily mean that they will protect Iranian skies from the US and Israeli attacks, because Iran is run by a government that last time did absolutely nothing to protect itself from Israeli attack. So we know what happened. It was a surprise attack, even though we all knew that Israel would start bombing Iran. Iran virtually had no air defense, which is also very interesting. Why Russia did not supply air defense systems to its strategic partner, why Iran did not purchase them from China, from other countries, why didn't they purchase any jets from Pakistan. Instead, it attacked Pakistan a few years ago, which was a very bad move from that perspective. So Iran was on its own. It also destroyed its own proxies in the region. I will explain how, if you allow me. So in 2023, when Hamas um, attacked Israel, or however we want to portray it, Israel started its operation against Gaza, and Iran at the time supported Hamas, which is also very strange because Hamas participated in the Syrian civil war against Assad forces, and Assad was backed by Tehran. And then when Hamas was in war with Israel, Iran supported Hamas, which is a radical Sunni movement, and Iran is a Shia majority country. We can understand that politically, right? Why Iran decided to support them. It would make sense to support Palestinian people and to provide humanitarian aid, but to support a radical Sunni organization is a bit strange, but okay. After that, what happened? Iran had its proxy in Lebanon called Hezbollah, and Hezbollah was striking Israeli empty barracks in northern Israel, creating zero damage to Israeli defense forces. It did not get the green light from Tehran to launch strikes on Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and other cities, even though at the time Hezbollah still had long-range missiles, but it was not allowed to use them. And then when Israel resolved the Gaza conflict in its favor, it was in a position to focus on Lebanon and on Hezbollah. And then it bombed Hezbollah's military facilities, completely destroying its long-range missiles, killing its military and political leadership, and basically won the war. So Iran lost its proxy. I would say that it effectively helped Israel eliminate Hezbollah. So Hezbollah no longer exists as a political force, especially not as a military force. Politically, yeah, it still has some influence in Lebanon, but militarily it cannot provide any resistance to Israeli attacks that go on to this day. So we can expect now something similar to happen to Yemen. Iran is also using Yemen as a proxy, the Houthi movement. They are firing those long-range missiles on Israel, but they're not very efficient, I would say. And sooner or later, I think Israel will lose its last proxy in the region. It still has some proxies in Iraq, though. Although, as we can see, they also do not cause any significant losses on the American troops there. They don't strike American bases in Iraq. They don't attack the government forces. So I don't see what's their role there. In Iraq, around 60% of the population, at least, is Shia Muslims, but Iran is not using that to strengthen its influence in the country. It could, but it's not doing that. So Iran is on its own. It does not have any allies. Russia is not its ally. They're just strategic partners, but Russia is not helping Iran. It was Iran that helped Russia when Russia invaded Ukraine. Then Iran supplied Russia with Shahed drones. They played a significant role at the time, but now Russia is not helping Iran. Even if reports that China supplied those air defense systems to Iran are true, that does not mean, as I said, that they will be used properly, given that the Iranian leadership has a history of making such strange moves. So I will not be surprised if they just leave them completely unprotected, and then Israel destroys them or the United States destroys them on the first day of their military campaign against Iran. So I think Iran is doomed one way or another, and that will happen in the coming weeks or months.
And just on Yemen, the latest I read, it seems like the Gulf countries, UAE, was mentioned, possibly Saudi. Maybe on Yemen, they're giving up for now. So they might just leave it be because it's been a tough nut to crack. So the reports that I read was that UAE is going to kind of let Yemen be. They can't do it, and they're going to shift their focus to Africa. So we'll see. And I just want to share my screen one more time. Here, a friend sent me this just before joining. I auto translated it from Spanish because it's hard to do it while I'm podcasting and thinking of other things. But this person has a point, saying that Trump has set the bar too high for any ruler in the world. I want to get to the second point, that this doesn't mean that we agree or disagree. I mean, this is just a fact of life. And it made me think, when you compare it to everyone else we're talking about, she's got a point here. Her name is Dania Rios Nassif. Trump and his team have done more in a year of their term than all the rulers combined. Just to give you an idea, in the first days of January 2026, they captured Maduro and put in check the entire financial system of drug trafficking. Okay, whatever. Withdrew the U.S. from 66. It's always 666, isn't it? 66 globalist bodies. There's a whole other story there, but okay, anyways. He did redefine the childhood schedule of vaccines, dropping it down. He changed the food pyramid. It's funny. She says he limited the benefits of the arms industry, but he now wants to raise the Pentagon budget to 1.5 trillion, right? Prohibits vulture funds from speculating on single family homes. And some of the stuff is not good, but I think if we compare it to like China and Russia and other countries, the US administration is just doing an insane amount of things. You've got all the stablecoin legislation and movement. I did want to add, you mentioned China. Shout out to past podcast guest Yasiru Ranaraja. He posted this interesting map where China is getting its oil supplies, and as you mentioned, it's a low amount from Venezuela, and they are building these sort of veins, pulling it in from Africa and the Middle East, Russia, and Kazakhstan, which was interesting. And to your point, the memes. You've seen this meme, perhaps, where it's got Putin with his the arms on the hips. That guy from that sports that meme, and it says Putin watching a special military operation, Venezuela, that takes 3 hours and not for years. And there's another one, Putin with his generals, Shoigu and Gerasimov, I think. Why didn't we just kidnap Zelensky and say we're running Ukraine from now on, FFS, for F's sake, and so I think that is correct. And so I guess my question now for you is, what does this and I mean, would you agree? Look, people, we are looking at this at reality. Let's call this black pilled vision. It's not like what we want to be or not want to be. This is just the reality. Like these multipolaristas have been saying, those reports that Russia downed an Israeli jet carrying nukes. Get out of here. They sent Oreshniks, hypersonics to Venezuela, which are going to defeat Washington. Never happened. Just, and I think Iran, I agree with you. Iran is doomed. They're going to be regime changed. It's clear. Look at the amount of energy Washington, the West, has expended. Doesn't mean I'm not a fan of Iran. I'm not a fan of regime change. They're between a rock and a hard place. It is what it is, and it's the same playbook. I read the TPA Ajax from 1953, the Mossadegh coup, right? The MI6 CIA plan. That plan actually said we're going to launch false flag operations, bomb mosques in the 1950s, blame it on the Mossadegh government, and then BBC is going to lie about the propaganda. They literally want to put in the Shah 2.0. They're literally, as we speak, running false flag operations in Iran, right? I've seen the videos. The Iranian diplomats are showing their foreign counterparts, look, we have video of masked guys with guns shooting Iranians. So those are foreign agents, clearly. And the Western media is saying, no, that's a lie. That's not true. I saw them interview an Iranian official, and who was it? The foreign minister. Anyways, my point is, this is how the reality is. What do you think this means for the bigger picture? For me, it seems like it's U.S. Empire 2.0. It's trying to take the planet and establish world empire, and it seems like nobody's stopping them, huh?
Well, even Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko repeatedly said that the U.S. is the empire and the greatest empire. in the world, the greatest empire that ever existed. I agree with him. So whether you like it or not, but I think it's true simply. Uh, and in Iran, as you mentioned, yeah, a lot of interesting things happened. As I said, I think the country is doomed. But I'm not an expert on that country. I have to point that out. I focus mainly on its relations with Russia and with the post-Soviet space. But I see many similarities between Russia and Iran, and especially when it comes to foreign policy and their approach. Even propaganda is very similar. When Israel attacked Iran, Iran responded. Its response was extremely weak. It did hit some targets in Iran, although it hit also a lot of civilian buildings. But I don't think it had a serious impact on the Israeli military, on its armed forces. On the other hand, Iran did suffer a lot from that war, and now we can see economically the country is also suffering. You said that those people who are firing that they are foreign mercenaries. Maybe they are, maybe they are not. In Iran, there's a lot of people who despise the Islamic Republic. That does not mean that they don't like their own country. They just don't like the system they have there, so they want to replace it with something else. Some say they want to be monarchy again, or to have some other form of governance. I don't know that. As I said, I'm not an expert, but I know for sure that a lot of people there simply despise the Islamic Republic, and they're willing to support Israel or the United States or whoever just to get rid of the Ayatollahs who are running the country. And even the people who are in charge there, they whether they do that deliberately or not is I don't know, but it's on record. They created a serious harm to their own country by not purchasing weapons, or by not building their own military industry. They did. I cannot say they didn't do that at all. They did, but it was not enough. So as a result, they suffered a defeat. In my view, what happened during the last war between Israel and Iran was Iranian defeat. Someone could say it was a brilliant victory for Tehran. And, just like, a few days ago, I saw some guy saying, that video went viral now, saying that what happened in Caracas, that Trump's special military operation was actually Russia's victory. It was a trap for Trump and for the United States. I spoke with a lot of analysts and people who are close to Western policymakers and people from think tanks. And so nobody ever told me, oh my God, we are losing. Russia deceived us. Putin deceived us. He allowed us to spread our influence in the post-Soviet space in Armenia, Kazakhstan, wherever. But it was a trap. Now we don't know what to do. We are doomed. Nobody ever told me that. So they all know, of course, that Russia is extremely weak. And a growing number of people can see that. It's quite clear now. But in spite of that, you still have a lot of those people who spread such disinformation about Russia winning the war, Iran winning, the axis of the resistance, however they portrayed it. I remember I wrote an article for Geopolitics and Empire a few years ago saying that they are the axis of the impotence. They are, because they simply cannot do anything against their opponents. So whether we like it or not, but that's the fact. Russia and Iran are weak, and the West is strong. And I don't think that will change anytime soon, because I don't see the alternative to the current system dominated by the West. There's simply no alternative. Those people who want to change the current global order, they only criticize what's happening now and what's happening in the world, but they offer no alternative. If you want to change something, then you must have a clear, wider picture of what you want, what kind of world you want to live in. But they don't provide that. They simply just don't like the United States, don't like the West, And many of them naively believe that Russia is somehow different, that system is Russia is much better, although it's not, of course. Russia, when it comes to internal politics, is much worse because there's virtually zero political freedom there. And when it comes to technocracy, and you're an expert on that, it's virtually the same as the West. Everything is digitalized, so there's no much difference. But as I said, there is no alternative to the ongoing system at this point. Maybe something will come up as the alternative in this century or next century, who knows? But at this point, it is what it is. Yeah. So that's the reality. The world is dominated by the West, and Russia and China and all other countries. In my opinion, they're just trying to improve their position within the existing world order. So when we talk about a new world order, China also talks a lot about a new world order. But when they say new world order and globalization, they don't mean the same thing that you mean. When they talk about globalization, they support it because when it comes to globalization, China definitely benefits because it exports its goods to the whole world. It's a global factory, so of course it will support globalization. But when they talk about a new world order, I think they actually want a world order in which China will have a better position. So there was always a power that wanted to have stronger presence and more influence and to build a new world order, and there will always be someone fighting for it. But at this point, we're living in a world order dominated by the US and Europe. Just like in ancient times, there was a Roman Empire. Previously, there was a Greek Empire. And then it was absorbed by the Roman Empire, and it dominated a world that was known to us, Europeans at least. So I think that's the case now in Europe as well, and in the whole world. We're dominated by Western civilization one way or another.
I just wanted to add to your point about Russia, which I agree with on the digitalization, but the political freedom. I'd say in the West, again, to be fair, so they're not going to say I'm some pro-Western puppet. There's no political freedom anywhere anymore. Not in the West, not in the USA, Canada, Mexico, EU, Europe, Russia. Nowhere. We are under global tyranny. There was a fantastic podcast. If you're interested, you should see it. It's in Croato-Serbian. Nikola, I know you speak Serbo-Croatian.
And you speak Croatia-Serbian.
This is basically the same thing. I'm going to get hate for that. But Radio Mrežnica, who's really good. I don't know if you know them, the Croatian podcast, but they had on a Croatian politician recently who explained how the Croatian government is a total mafia state. There's no political freedom in Croatia. None here in Mexico. You get assassinated immediately if you, as a Mexican politician, deviate. America, what can we say? It's a uniparty. Same thing in Kremlin, Beijing, everywhere else. So I wanted to add that. And to the theory, I would say there is this multipolar theory. There is this plan for a world after Pax Americana, but there's no way to put it into practice, right? Or enforce it. I guess to your point is that there is this plan, this dream, but they can't do it. It's kind of like, okay, I mean, it's a far stretch, but communism. I'm an anti-communist, but communism, there's a theory it can never be put into practice successfully. Or maybe what we have seen is that's the actual communism in the Soviet Union. And so I just don't see, as you've explained, any way of them for now being able to enforce it, unless, we have a catastrophic third world war and something happens to the US dollar and it collapses, then maybe at some point we shift to this new world order. But I don't see that in the near term. And as you mentioned, China, they have been proposing, as you say, I've been saying for the longest time, the East and West, they're all down. They have the same ideology, globalism, as you said, right? Globalization. China just proposed UN 2.0. Let's upgrade the operating system to the Global Governance Initiative, right? You've seen Xi Jinping. I mean, he didn't write that. Come on. There's this whole team of people. And they want this global governance initiative. So Xi Jinping is saying, yeah, well, let's have a world government that's totalitarian and technocratic, with QR codes and biometric IDs and the neo-feudalism, Soylent Green of the Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals. But we all have to have an equal seat at the table, guys. Right? That's basically it. It's not an alternative. It's basically them saying, "Can you guys stop? Throwing your leftovers at us like they're the dogs under the table." Almost like give us an equal seat. And I'm not poo-pooing again China and Russia. I think all countries should be treated equally. But it seems the main powers are currently in the West.
Yeah, but that's not how the world works. So I don't think the United States will allow them to be equal. Why would they? I mean, in order to enforce what you talked about, they will need to defeat militarily the United States and NATO, which I don't think will happen. So the West can, I don't think it will collapse. I think it will continue declining, but it's a long-term process. So maybe in 100, 200 years, the West will not be what it is now, and then some other foreign power, some other power will come and replace the West as the dominant actor in the global arena. But that can happen, as you said, either as a result of a large-scale war, or it can happen organically, because historically, empires, when they reach their peaks, they start declining. So that will happen with the West as well, and with the United States. And then when that happens, someone else will come and basically continue doing what they're doing now. So this is the world we're living in.
And just to add again, to cut through the multipolar propaganda, and I'm saying that from a factual perspective. It hasn't been true, a lot of the prognosis, and the fact that this, I think if there was an ultimate showdown, there's a good chance Russia could defend itself ultimately. But we're talking about mass casualties, World War II style. When Napoleon went in and lost in the 1800s. When Hitler went in, he got his butt kicked. And it was, basically, I've taught in history that it was the Soviets that basically won World War II, that defeated. They did the bulk of the work to destroy Germany, and then the West came in afterward. But what's my point here? If it came down, Sergei Karaganov was last night on Tucker Carlson, and I watched his interview, and he's talking about nuking Europe. I want to get your thoughts on that. But
they talk about that on a daily basis. Don't take it too seriously.
Yeah, but my point was that the multipolar propaganda says NATO is no match for Russia. But if I saw a post recently comparing the numbers, the manpower, it's like double or more than double. I forget now, but in terms of manpower, NATO and the West is much higher than Russia. So I think it doesn't make sense to say NATO is not so powerful. And almost like I feel like that is a psyop to say that. And I'm no fan of NATO people. Like you can't see it up above me, but it's from Ron Paul Institute. It says, end NATO terrorism. NATO is a terrorist or globalist. It's one of the key groups for world government. They've even said they would like to replace the UN as the world government and the world police. I believe, I had 2021 Associated Press did a hit piece on Francis Boyle mentioning my podcast that same week. I was taken off of Patreon. That article was written by Atlantic Council, which is NATO's brain. So I'm not a fan, but let's look at reality. NATO, I think, is a match for Russia. And I wanted to share my screen real quick before moving on. Where are we? Just to your earlier point about Iran. I get what you're saying. My view is that here's Scott Horton. You had a politician say, tonight we published the main edition of Channel 14. Foreign elements are arming the protesters in Iran with live weapons, and this is the reason for the hundreds of dead among the regime's people. Anyone is free to guess who we're talking about. Scott Horton says, I'll put my money on the CIA, PJAK, P-E-J-A-K, Jundallah, Mossad, M-E-K, monarchists, and what the hell, make a parlay, MI6 and Azeri DTX backing factions in the north too. And I get what you're saying there. There are definitely, for sure. Most people are dissatisfied with their own governments. We are dissatisfied with our Mexican government. Venezuelans surely are dissatisfied with their Venezuelan government. Cubans, Americans to a mixed degree, but I think a lot of the actors are these foreign groups like Scott Horton mentions. But to get your thought on Ukraine and where that ends, you had Reuters say recently that Trump says Zelensky, not Putin, is holding up a Ukraine peace deal. And I've been talking about this for the longest time. The EU needs a pretext for its own existence and move toward a true supranational, globalist, politically integrated beast. And now you're hearing them say the EU ways replacing US troops. You have the whole Greenland stuff, the NATO divisions, Ukraine. It says replacing US troops with a unified European army. So they are largely, in my opinion, using the boogeyman of Russia to keep from collapsing economically, to take more money to build EU up, and also as a reason for creating a unified EU army. And so, what are your thoughts on what happens in Ukraine? You've got Witskov saying BlackRock is ready to come in and take over Ukraine. They're talking about peace talks. Meanwhile, Karaganov says, and it's interesting, Karaganov says, EU is the problem, not USA, that specifically it's the EU. And so how do you think Ukraine ends, or does it just continue frozen like this?
So now when Trump is in charge, the US is no longer a problem. Now it's the EU. So that's the dominant narrative in the Kremlin now. Because there's a lot of politicians in Russia, including Dmitriev and many others, who now try to portray Trump as Russia's friend, which is not true, of course. Trump continues supporting Ukraine one way or another, and continues imposing sanctions on Russia, if not on Russia directly, then on countries doing business with Russia. But nevertheless, they continue portraying Trump as a pro-Russian American leader. Now they have a big problem because Trump kidnapped or captured, however you want to call it, Putin's friend Maduro. So now they have a problem. How is it possible that Putin's friend Trump or Putin's puppet, they even call Donald Trump Putin's puppet. So how is it possible that Putin's puppet captured Putin, one of Putin's allies and friends? So that whole narrative doesn't make any sense. Of course, Europe is preparing for a direct war with Russia. I've been writing about that for a couple of years now, because now it's quite obvious they're investing a lot into their military industrial capabilities, and they will continue doing that, and they will continue arming Ukraine. I don't know whether the United States will participate in a potential direct war or not, but I'm absolutely sure it will continue arming both Europe and Ukraine. I'm afraid that such a war in the long term is inevitable. I don't know how exactly that will happen. Maybe Russia will really send some drones into European airspace, and then they will be down, and then that will be pretext for European invasion of Russia. I don't think Russia will invade Europe. It does not have the capacity to do that. But I'm absolutely sure that European countries are very powerful, and they do have capacity to invade and occupy certain parts of the Russian Federation. Not the whole country, of course, because the country is the largest geographically largest country in the world, but they can capture some parts of Russia. I see that they are preparing for war. And why not? I mean, Russia showed that it's extremely weak. And as Putin said many years ago, the weak get beaten. So why wouldn't they simply benefit from the fact that Russia is weak and establish control over Russian oil fields and gas reserves and so on, and resolve their energy situation, which is not very good, because now they stopped purchasing Russian energy and they're buying extremely expensive American LNG, and they're buying oil from other producers and so on. Why wouldn't they eventually invade Russia and do what the United States and others did to Libya and Iraq, and now they can get relatively cheap oil and gas. In my view, that would make sense. Now, whether that will happen or not, we will see. I think, unfortunately, the large-scale war is on the horizon, but when exactly that will happen, I don't know. Russia is bleeding in Ukraine. It is losing a lot of men there. It faces manpower shortages. Ukraine has the same problem. That's why we don't see any large-scale movements. Although drones have they started playing a significant role in this war because now you're no longer in a position to launch such military operations anymore because there are virtually thousands, if not dozens of thousands of drones that are FPV drones flying over your head. So you cannot have such maneuvers as you had in 2022 or in the past, unless you're the United States and Israel, because they're always fighting against opponents having no drones or no air defense, no jets, and then they can successfully conduct special military operations. Their wars look more like police operations than regular wars. Which is not the case when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. They're fighting a bloody large-scale war, both countries suffering heavy casualties. What Russia is doing now, in my view, from a military perspective, does not make any sense. They are striking civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, destroying the country's energy system. It does make lives of millions of people in Ukraine horrible because they live under blackouts, no electricity for 20 hours a day or so. But it has zero impact on Ukrainian military because the Ukrainian armed forces and their military-industrial complex, they use, according to reports, diesel generators. So if you destroy energy infrastructure in Ukraine, that will not have a serious impact on the Ukrainian military, especially given that they get a lot of weapons from producers that are out of Ukraine, from Western countries. So Russia is just attacking that military infrastructure, but it's not making any significant progress on the ground. And in theory, it could capture some territory, right? It would have to mobilize more men and to attack in some regions where Ukraine has not yet built its fortifications, but it's not doing that. Russia continues it's attacking the Donbass that's still under Ukrainian control, but Ukraine has very strong fortifications there, and as a result, Russia suffers heavy casualties, making very little gains. And it hasn't achieved any of its military or political goals in Ukraine. The war has been going on for 4 years, longer than the Second World War. So Russia's been involved in this so-called special military operation longer than it was involved in the Second World War, and it did not achieve any of its goals. And the peace, unfortunately, is not on the horizon. I think the war will go on in 2026 as well. There are alleged attempts to force both Ukraine and Russia to sign a peace agreement. Trump is doing that. I think from his perspective, it would make sense to force them to do that because that will allow the United States to focus on other regions. But on the other hand, maybe that's not necessary because, as we can see, the US can freely conduct its own special military operations around the world. At the same time, it can continue helping Ukraine one way or another. So the US, and especially its military-industrial complex, benefits from this war. Russian military-industrial complex also benefits, and I'm sure oligarchs also are quite happy about this. Not all of them. Those who have close ties with the West, they are not. They want this war to end so that they can continue doing business with the West as usual. But I don't think that's going to happen. Because even if Russia and Ukraine somehow sign a ceasefire deal, which I don't think will happen, but if that happens, that does not mean that the West will immediately lift sanctions it imposed on Russia. So I think there will be a lot of conditions Russia will have to fulfill in order to get sanctions eased. and its economy will continue suffering despite those propaganda narratives that Russia's economy is growing, that is doing fine despite sanctions. I don't think that's true, first of all. If it's true, then why does Russia insist that sanctions must be lifted? Iran is doing the same thing. It always says, we want to negotiate with the US, but we want sanctions to be lifted. So if they're making such enormous economic progress despite sanctions, then why do they want the West to lift sanctions? It's imposed on them. So of course, sanctions hurt a lot, and they will continue hurting. Especially if Trump continues pressuring other countries not to purchase Russia's oil. He can do the same when it comes to Iranian oil. But on the other hand, that could lead to a serious energy crisis in the world. So I think his team will balance, trying not to lead to such an outcome. But in the long term, I think both Russia and Iran will lose, and their oil will not belong to them. It will belong to some other corporations, their gas as well, to foreign corporations. And we will see who will be the major winner here. I don't think it will be China. I think Western corporations will benefit once the Islamic Republic ceases to exist. And if eventually Russia and Europe, the European Union, begin fighting a large-scale war, and as a result, Russia suffers a defeat, then those countries that manage to establish control over Russian oil fields and gas reserves will be the major winners.
Yeah, I'd agree that they are preparing for war. Over the summer, I got to have lunch with Croatian Admiral Davor Domazet-Lošo, who has said on Radio Mrežnica that they're going to take Europe and throw it at Russia again for the third time. So it seems like they want a war. And in my mind, it's for globalist purposes, to bring us closer to global martial law. We see them, they're using this pretext for erasing civil liberties across the West. We could have a same COVID situation. Pascal Denis Rancourt said COVID was sort of a simulation for a Third World War, where national security, no free speech, everyone needs QR codes, digital passports, all that, rationing, all that sort of stuff. We saw my Croatian government, the military conscription. For now, I'm too old for it, but as we've seen in Ukraine, they might increase that limit. And they said Croats abroad are supposed to register with their embassy. Well, guess what? There's no Croatian embassy in Mexico. Screw you guys. So come and get me. I'm not going to go die for some globalist satanic banker wars. No way, no how. And I guess what was my other point to ask you, because you've spent some time in my former home of Central Asia. And you know, it just seems beyond, Russia, Iran, Washington just continues to expand its sphere. Azerbaijan, Armenia. I lived in Kazakhstan. We had the reports that Kazakhstan shut the border. A large amount of goods, millions and millions of dollars worth, were passing through Kazakhstan to cross into the Russian border. They stopped it, and that caused a huge loss for Russia. As well as now Kazakhstan is building an ammo factory for NATO standard munitions. What are your thoughts, just in general? What's important or interesting to that in that region of the world and the dynamics?
But doesn't that mean that it was part of Putin's cunning plan, right? So they allowed Western governments to infiltrate there and to think that they actually established control over those countries, but in reality, it was a trap, right? That's what pro-Kremlin propaganda claims. Actually, I don't think it was pro-Kremlin propaganda. I think the whole purpose of that narrative is actually it's a multi-dimensional game. So you have people like Scott Ritter or Pepe Escobar and so on. So they talk about Russia winning all over the world. And if you face them with facts, right? You said about Kazakhstan, where Russia is losing its influence, right? That's on record. That's what's happening. Everyone can see that. Then they will tell you that it's all part of Putin's cunning plan, that it's a trap, and so on. And I think you don't see that on Russian media. I watch Russian media. They don't promote that narrative. There are propagandists who talk stuff like that, but I don't think that's the dominant narrative. There are even voices within Russia claiming that Russia is not doing a good job and that its allies are turning their back on Moscow, that something should change. But then you have voices like that in the West. They're all based in the West. And then pro-Kremlin propaganda in Russia at home, they use it to say, oh, look, there is an American analyst saying that we are winning in Ukraine, that Kazakhstan is under our control, and the whole post-Soviet base is ours. You see, if he says that, then it must be true. They know better. You see, our enemies even admit that. So I think that's one segment of this game. And the other one is just to keep the Western audience, those people who believe in the alternative media, to keep them
pacified.
I'm sorry?
To keep them pacified?
Well, yeah, and just to remove them from reality, just to they're telling them the stories that they want to believe in, and they simply love listening to such narratives about Russia winning and the U.S. is about to collapse and so on. So it's a multi-dimensional game, as I said. Well, in reality, on the other hand, Russia is losing its influence in Central Asia, in the South Caucasus as well, because it's quite clear now that the emperor has no clothes and that Russia is weak. So of course they want to distance themselves from Moscow. And what can they do but to try to balance between all these foreign powers operating in those strategically important regions? Although many of them want to establish closer ties with the West for many reasons. But when I spoke with people who are involved in policymaking process in Central Asia, they told me that it is China that is much more powerful than the West when it comes to Central Asia, especially when it comes to economy, because those countries they have very high trade balance with China, which is not the case when it comes to West. They export their oil and gas, so their natural resources to Western countries, but they import everything else not from the West but from China. So it is China that benefits, and China also owns a lot of mines in the region. So there's a competition between China and Western governments in Central Asia. Well, Russia is losing its positions, and that's the direct consequence of Putin's so-called special military operation. So Russia's nominal allies are turning their back on Moscow. They don't want to participate in the Ukraine war, and they never supported the Kremlin's actions. They never condemned them either. So they took a neutral position officially, while in reality they want to establish closer ties with the West, and China is benefiting on the other hand because it economically spreads its influence in the region. So in the long term, I think we will have another great game in Central Asia, but this time it will be between the West and China, and Russia will be simply kicked out of that region if it suffers a defeat in Ukraine. But there is no that's my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think in the West they still don't have clear strategy of what they want to do with Russia, and I don't know what their ultimate plan is. I know that there are forces that want Russia to suffer a defeat, and they're interested in a collapse of the Russian Federation. They want to create numerous new republics where the ethnic minorities now make up the majority of the population, like in Chechnya, Ingushetia, and all over Russia. But there are also forces who just want to preserve this some kind of balance. and because they are aware that if Russia suffers a defeat, that there could be a chaos, and China could benefit, and Ukraine could also benefit. Because imagine Ukraine coming out as the winner, a country that defeated Russia. It will be politically much stronger now. It will in the future. It will be stronger than it is now, and it can benefit when it comes to its the EU path. So I think they are not interested in that outcome. They just want to preserve some kind of status quo so that Russia does not achieve its goals, but Ukraine does not win, or at least does not win in a way that the authorities in Kiev want. So it's, as I said, a multi-dimensional game.
Yeah, I just see. We'll see how it all goes. America is just again, we're moving towards world government, and I think that's the ultimate goal there. And as you said, I could see their plans, either outcome serving their goals, where they do want to chop up. We've seen the Western globalist think tank maps of chopping Russia, what they did to Yugoslavia, right? Create little republics and then reintegrate them into supranational globalist institutions like the EU. That's one way to go. So they want to do that, break up the Russian Federation, or maybe just convert it into Eurasia. If they can create a Kremlin that is more globalist minded, that they more easily control, they still maintain that vast territory, and we're just going to upgrade it to a globalist Eurasia, like in Orwell's 1984. My last question for you is the technocracy. Now, as you said, you're not an expert on it. I am obsessed with it, but your travel reports have been very informative because you've been to China. You've mentioned like the crazy things. From what I understand, you can no longer effectively, you can't use cash anymore. Everything is just digital payments. I read you. I think you sent me this article regarding Kazakhstan from last month. At the Times of Central Asia, I posted it in my feeds. Face pay, palm scans, and AI cameras inside Kazakhstan's digital transformation. And then it's all about everything. With just a smartphone, citizens can apply for marriage license, open a business, rapid digitalization, cashless, school children entering campuses, scanning their palms, all that. Subway fares can be paid with a glance. This is Kazakhstan. And then this article came out. Malaysia mandates yesterday. I said, we are up Poop Creek without a paddle. Malaysia mandates digital ID for Malaysians. Starting today, Malaysian citizens departing the country will be required to authenticate themselves using My Digital ID when accessing the National Integrated Immigration System mobile application. It's part of the country's strategy to implement My Digital ID across governance, society, and economy. The government plans to have 95% of public services integrated into the digital ID system by 2030, along with private sector services. Already, telecommunications operators are being shifted to My Digital ID's identity verification technology for their mobile application. And just another example here in Mexico, any Mexicans that go to the airport and leave for an international flight must fill out the migration form, which I have to do. Up until now, it's been paper, analog. 2 months in November, late November, they said you have to do it now digitally. For a little while, they're keeping the paper version. And I went online last night because I sometimes I don't want to do that. I'm not going to travel with my phone, or what am I going to do then? I can't go on my flight because I can't fill out your stupid migration statistic form because I don't have a smartphone. But I did test it where last night you can go to the actual website. I filled out junk data and it gave me a PDF, which you can download and print out and then take with you to the airport. But anyways, it's just getting too insane. Nikola, do you have any thoughts, observations on how fast this is going, given the experiences you've had traveling in Central Asia, China, or anything you're seeing in Serbia?
Well, I should travel to Southeast Asia soon, so I will tell you my experiences when I get back. As you said, I'm not an expert on those issues. You are. An old-fashioned guy, so I just prefer cash. In some countries in Central Asia, for instance, in Tajikistan, they still use cash, and it's almost impossible to use credit cards. While in Kazakhstan, I don't know anyone who uses cash. And when I talked to ordinary people there, they told me that they prefer it that way. They said it's easier to pay with phones and everything. And I know that for me as a foreigner, it was difficult when I drove a car there and I had to pay for tolls. I couldn't because I didn't have a local app. And the only option I had was to give someone cash and then he could pay it for me. So it was difficult. In China, it's easier because foreigners can use their payment apps like Alipay and WeChat and so on. So I think the whole world is going into that direction. I think that will come to Europe as well. Here in Serbia, we're still very far from that. We're more similar to Tajikistan than to those countries. Cash is still widely used. I think that's the case in many other European countries as well, in Germany for sure. But in the long term, I think cash will disappear. I'm not happy about it because, as I said, I'm an old-fashioned guy. I like it this way. But I think that's what's going to happen. And then digital currency will probably be replaced by something else in the long term. But again, I know very little about that, except that that's what's happening.
Yeah, I think I remember the story. You were in China and you said you needed some article of clothing, and you were in your hotel and there was like nowhere to get it, or you didn't know where to buy it, and then you just went on the online China website, whatever it was, Alibaba or something, and you ordered it, and it was delivered by robot in like 20 minutes. Was that something like
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah. That's how things work there. Yeah, they're very efficient. But then I'm afraid that the robots will replace humans in many spheres in the long term. When I talk to ordinary Chinese about that, they don't have such fears. They think the new jobs will come up. So I think it's people in the West in other parts of Europe, not just Western Europe, here in the Balkans as well, that are worried about that. But in Asia, they seem to like that kind of system, digitalization and digital currencies and so on. As you mentioned, Malaysia, but excluding China, all other countries they have a fairly young population, so it's easier for young people to adapt and to use technology. And so for us, we're dinosaurs. So for us, it doesn't make much sense to use it, but we'll have to use it. It's inevitable, I'm afraid.
No, yeah, I'm a dinosaur. I don't want to do any of this stuff. And I was just going to add today, Scott Ritter posted he got debanked in the US. But then Arnaud Bertrand, Frenchman living in China, he reported on this story from Berliner Zeitung, Ai Weiwei, the Chinese dissident. And when I was a young man, I actually had an Amnesty International Ai Weiwei t-shirts. And I guess he's returned to China and he says, this is interesting. So again, this is to point out the nuance and how this is all so complex. He says he described feeling that Beijing had become like a broken jade being perfectly reassembled. He felt no fear returning to China. He complained that daily life difficulties in Europe, where he's lived for the past 10 years, are at least 10 times what they are in China, criticizing European bureaucracy. He reactivated his dormant Chinese bank account in minutes. He contrasts his experience in Europe, and I can attest to that in Croatia. He says, in Germany, my bank accounts were closed twice. Also, my girlfriend's. In Switzerland, I was refused an account. Another, so on. So I actually think that observation is correct. So it's more digitized in China, and easier in some ways. But I think the globalists chose China because of its collectivist mentality and increased more materialism, and less individualism and concern for the philosophies of liberty and freedom.
But
And
then you have a lot of analysts or propagandists claiming that China will eventually replace the West, that China is the future. I don't think that will happen. It is, when it comes to technology, it is an advanced society. But let me ask you and your viewers and listeners, can you name three Chinese modern writers, singers, actors? Of course not. And you can mention three American actors, musicians, writers easily, because we live in a world dominated by the West, not by China. So culture is a very important aspect here. Chinese culture is not very attractive for Western people. I like Chinese culture, but most people there, they don't find it attractive. It's not appealing enough. So I don't think China has the capacity to rule the world and to replace the West as the dominant force in this world. Although, of course, when it comes to technology, it will come to Europe not from the United States, but I think it will come from China, because what we're seeing now in China, that's what we will see in Europe in 5 to 10 years, and
Right.
in
And
other parts of the world as well.
yeah, and then that's not my point. I think that they're both going to continue. They're going to coexist, convergence, right? They're going to somehow patchwork together for this global governance totalitarian system. And then my point is, yes, it's as Ai Weiwei says, it's more easy and convenient, but all it takes is one press of the button. Like we're seeing this in the EU first. Maybe more so we're seeing it now in the EU and the West than even in China. They say there's no social credit system. Okay, whatever. There's an algorithm ghetto. It's the same thing. It's worse. So they can just press the button in China at any moment, and now you're living under absolute total tyranny. You're unpersoned for thought crime. That's, I think, the danger, and I think that's going to eventually happen, and not just in China. I mean, it's already happening in China, but in every country in the world. I've mentioned before, here in Mexico, in the state of Michoacan, they have now, they've created their thought crime ministries, the cybersecurity ministry of truth, thought crime. One person criticized the politician, a Mexican, on Facebook in Michoacan, and they were arrested for thinking wrong think, thought crime. That's where we're at. So, all right, we covered a lot. Nikola, where are the best places to find you?
And they can find me on Twitter. I also have an account on Blue Sky, Telegram, although I'm not particularly active there. I'm mostly on Twitter, so I think that's the best place to find me. And there I post links to my articles and shows. So yeah, Twitter is the best option at this point.
All right, follow Nikola on the socials. Until next time, hvala.
Thank you, Jorge.